Hey, welcome back to Gold Shields. I'm Dan Murphy, along once again with my partner in crime, Tom Smith. How we doing today, buddy?
Awesome. Always
Awesome.
happy to be here.
Of course, we are. We're happy we love this show. This is a lot of fun. Made all the better by the amazing amount of people who we've been getting feedback from. Right, Tom? I'm blown away.
Yeah, you know what? We usually reserve this spot in our opening to give a shout out to our sponsors or someone affiliated with the show. But you know what? Dan and I just thought about it, and all we wanted to do in this segment is thank everyone who's been listening
That's
and
right.
watching. That's it. I mean, because listen, we are not wrapped up in numbers, but we do pay attention to them because that's part of our job and the show. And continuously from day one, going up, going up, going up all the time. And that's not because, I mean, that's because of our listeners and our watchers, so
And
we
our guests.
just,
And our
yeah.
guests.
Oh, our guests are, geez,
Outstanding.
I'll line our guests up with anybody
That's
out
right.
there,
That's right.
anybody.
We've been very
Uh,
lucky. Very
yeah, so
lucky.
we just wanted to thank everyone that's watching and listening because, it keeps us going, keeps us motivated, and it keeps us kind of, hey, what guests are we going to get to blow them away this time? And that's our focus, Dan?
It absolutely is. We want to bring compelling stories. We want to bring, the difference between our show and so many other podcasts is everybody else is out there reporting on and commenting on and analyzing somebody else's work. We bring people on who tell you about their work, and we get a chance to discuss it with them. And that's why we think we're different. And I think it's resonating with some people. And we're seeing a lot of great comments come into the website. And even if you have a negative comment, let us know. We want the feedback. We want to get better, right, Tom? Every week, our goal is to get better.
To get better, and we get it. We get the comments and we get the emails, which are great. Keep them coming, because we read them all. Me and Dan, no one else. There's no one else out there reading them and typing something. It's me and you doing it. So just keep them coming. Dan, listen, I just noticed you're near a concrete wall. Are you in some undisclosed secret location this week?
Tom, you know that the work that I do and sometimes you do takes us to places we can't comment on. And I'm sorry, I just can't.
All right, I won't push it. I just, I just noticed it. It's not the normal place we're usually at. And I just wanted to ask and see everyone, we're partners. We do the job. We've known each other for 20 years, and there's still things I don't know, and I'm not allowed to know.
That's okay. You're okay. You're better off. And it's just the way
Oh,
it
I don't
is.
want to know.
But I will say this. I will say this. It's very hot, and I don't understand 3 words of the language. That's all I'll say.
Just keep doing this. Thumbs up. Thumbs up.
It does go a long way. Thumbs up
It does.
internationally. Yeah,
It
everybody knows
does.
that. Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Have something to trade and thumbs
Yeah.
up.
Well, let's talk real quickly about who we have on the show today. We're very lucky to have Jim Dinkins. Jim Dinkins is a personal friend of mine. We worked together at U.S. Bank, but more than that, Jim Dinkins is the consummate professional at what he did for many years on behalf of our country with the federal government. Executive Associate Director of Homeland Security Investigations, everything to do with the border and the security of our country. He's an expert in it and a great, great guy. Can't wait for you to meet him. And we'll be right back in just a minute with our guest today. We know you're going to love this show. And we're back. Gold Shields. This is Dan Murphy, along with my partner in crime, Tom Smith, and our guest today, who we're very excited about, Jim Dinkins. Jim and I go back several years. We worked together at U.S. Bank. He's had a heck of a career, outstanding accomplishment in his federal law enforcement career, and he's currently thriving and doing very well in the private sector. But a friend, a man I respect immensely. Welcome to Gold Shields, Jim Dinkins.
Thanks, Dan, and it's great seeing you again. And Tom, it's great to meet you, and thanks for having me on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So we you're the kind of guy, if somebody Googles, is going to see that you did a 60-minute interview about El Chapo. But that's certainly just one little snippet of your career. Tell us a little bit about Jim, where you grew up, how you made your way into law enforcement. Let's get to know.
Sure. And it's funny, Dan, because the great thing about people is you hear their stories, and nobody ends up where they ever planned on going, right? And man
Right.
plans, God
Right.
laughs, and he laughed a lot in my life. So,
Yeah.
I knew just as a kid, I knew I wanted to be a detective or, an investigator. And so I got a criminal justice degree, in the 80s, and started at that time just out of circumstance. Thank God for my university. I went to University of Detroit. Luckily, they sought out and defined me and all the students internships while they were going to college and getting their degrees. And luckily, they found me one with the United States Customs Service in the Office of Investigations, which is housed at that time with the U.S. Customs Service had about 2,000, 1,800 special agents that handled all the investigations that would happen of seizures or cross-border smuggling. And so, I as an intern and coming into DC 6 months on, 6 months off in the 80s, it was all about the greatest threats at that time was really Colombian cartel drug smuggling. That's the time that the homicides, even in the United States, unlike Mexico and in Miami and so forth, it was just through the chart. And the Colombian cartels dominated the drug trafficking, smuggling routes, distribution routes in the United States. And they really had command and control of a lot of the major cities. And when things didn't go their way, the violence was intense. And as we all know from Escobar and the Ochoas and the main cartels, they would also take actions against the Colombian government as well if they interfered with their smuggling operation. So it was an interesting time to come up as a special agent. And my first post after when I graduated and became a special agent with Customs was in San Francisco, and we dealt with a lot of maritime smuggling. It's people were smuggling routes either on ships and or the high seas, and then bringing them into California for distribution throughout the United States. So they were trying to avoid the pressure that was being placed in the Caribbean to go around there, and then that's how we would ultimately end up involved in those types of investigations.
That's interesting. A lot of people probably wouldn't think of that. The focus has always been on Miami and up to New York and that side, but the whole West Coast, and how open and expansive it can be, and how probably in many ways less policed it was than the more congested East Side and Caribbean. Tom, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, everyone's very, knowledgeable with the route from Colombia up to the East Coast, through the Caribbean, usually through Miami and up the West Coast. What was the route on the West Coast? It's a bigger area and more kind of open water. You don't have, like, the Caribbean has a couple islands you can kind of hide behind or hide in for a little while, whereas the Pacific's kind of wide open. So what was the route like from that side?
A lot of it, and matter of fact, we had one. So it was fine in so the hunting was easier, and I don't want to say it was an easy job, but literally cocaine was falling out of the sky and washing up on the shores in South Florida, right? And when you're in the West Coast, our approach was really trying to infiltrate them through money laundering. And so, the vessels and or ships could come in. They would basically go around and through the Panama Canal, come up basically through like LA, huge seaport. So, it's a little harder to find that needle in the haystack than from seaport inside Miami or fast boat in Miami. So they would use some of the very similar techniques to bring it up through California and either along the coastal line there, either bringing it up in the seaport in containers and or private vessel just going around. That's really what we saw as the merge, is they had to find new routes. That's when they started partnering with Mexican drug organizations, is for their routes. They still maintained all control, but they are using Mexico as a route to be blending into all the commerce that they had going across the border and all the boats and fishing boats and everything that they had down in Mexico. And that was really when we started seeing that first merger of that relationship, outside of just tons of you might bring in a ton of cocaine into Florida. Obviously, LA and the West Coast had a same type of demand. It would be distributed into into California or the West Coast, and those monies had to get back to Colombia. And that's usually a big part where we did. So most of my younger career was spent in money laundering or undercover operations, where we are laundering money for the cartels to get it back to Colombia, and then identifying the people who was bringing us the funds, also, and who they were collecting those funds from, which will ultimately lead you to not just money laundering organization, but the cocaine distribution and smuggling organizations too.
So anybody any cop or detective who's ever worked with the Customs Service, now it's called ICE, but fascinating amount of power at the border out of necessity. I used to love to work with them because you don't need a search warrant. Anything comes at the port of entry into this country, and it's like, I want to open that, and you can open it, and amazing stuff gets found. And I try to explain to people how many people use the Postal Service to move drugs around the world. You name it. It's an epidemic, and I can't imagine what you used to see at the port of San Francisco or any other place you worked. The sheer volume of stuff that was coming through,
Absolutely.
right?
And the thing is, with shipping containers and technology, we didn't have scanners back then and be able to scan whole containers at a time. You had to spend 8 hours of your day to devan a container to inspect all the packages. And I'll tell you, the largest heroin seizure that I believe still exists today came in the seaport in San Francisco when I was there, and it was found completely by a compliance exam. So in addition to inspectors and intelligence that you're getting from cases that target and using that border search authority that you mentioned, Dan, right? You can search a person. Matter of fact, if you follow them out of the port, you can still search them wherever you go, as long as you keep eyes on them and you have a reasonable expectation that they did not, you did not lose sight. So therefore, that border search continues on as long as you're following them away from the port. But the largest seizure, so, we all know you go to the grocery store and you get those plastic bags. Unless you're in New York, you might get some paper bags, right? In the old days, they originally came out of rolls, and they still sometimes do. But, there's also really hard to actually get that dang bag loaded up because they're stuck together more when they're compressed in a roll. But yeah, a whole container came in of those plastic bags. The organization had smuggled in, the importer had smuggled, or not smuggled in, that we didn't know at that time, but had imported the fifth time. They had never had done a compliance inspection, because how you declare the goods and the type of good it is depends on your duty and or prohibition for counter dumping and stuff. So there's usually an inspection to make sure, hey, you're a new importer. We want to make sure you're declaring your goods appropriately, because originally the country was founded on duties coming in. Before they started taxing, for a long time it was just duties funded the government. Then it became taxation as well. And then we were still one of the largest revenue generators outside of taxes for the U.S. government was U.S. Customs Service collecting duties. So that's a common thing. Well, long story short, they go out and they do an inspection, and they find over 1,000 pounds of pure China white heroin. And that was at the seaport in San Francisco or Oakland. It was actually delivered to a warehouse less than a mile away from my house. And they sat on that warehouse. They just delivered it. We had taken out, and I think you gentlemen know, and anybody in law enforcement know, we left a representative sample. Well, with 1,300 pounds or 1,200 pounds of pure China white, we needed to leave a significant representative sample, which was over 10 kilos. Which is greater than most seizures you're going to get, right? So it was intense to make sure when we delivered that we had eyes and ears on it, and that we don't have all this sophisticated. Even though that you would watch, L.A. Law today and a lot of the detective shows today, you might see some really high tech stuff, right? This is old school,
Oh yeah.
So it went to
Old school. You used to take your finger, dip it. Yeah, that's good stuff.
And a surveillance camera was your camera that you were taking out of your car window, right?
Exactly.
But that was delivered right down the street from my house in a business facility, a little warehouse area with a bunch of different small businesses, and they just put all that in there, loaded it all up. They put it in their warehouse, and they let it sit there for months. So we were on surveillance, sitting outside. We finally were able to get inside and get a camera showing down on the pallets of plastic bags, aka heroin, and they just sat there. They were smart. They brought it in, they let it sit there, and they never touched it for several weeks. It's just sitting in the warehouse, and every day, 24 hours a day, we're on that through the holidays, waiting for them to finally. What are they going to do? Or where are they going to move it? And it was funny because one day, the owner of the warehouse um, goes into the back, and he's looking for they had a system, because this is like 40-foot container full of plastic bags. They had a system where the heroin was within the individual boxes, because it wasn't all heroin. They were hidden inside the plastic bag boxes as well. Goes in and looks and says, he can't find it. And as he's looking up, he sees the camera looking down at it. So he gets a ladder and he climbs up, and we're in this surveillance van, and all you see on the camera is his head as he's grabbing our camera off. But this is how life works. His wife came out and said, "What are you doing with the camera?" And he says, "Well, I found this camera looking down at the shipment." And she says, "Well, that's part of our security system. Put it back in there." So he readjusts it, gets off his ladder. Guys, he didn't have video camera as part of the security system. They had entry point security. That's it. They did not have video surveillance. But so we were all waiting to go launch, take them down, and lo and behold, they're just this is billions of dollars worth of heroin, and that's how smart they were. And she was explaining to him, if we had seized it, it would have had Customs would have put green tape that said examined by U.S. Customs across, because that's what the green. So obviously she knew her business. You open up a box or a suitcase and you can't get it back. You cover it up with examined by U.S. Customs tape. So she was explaining how it works. So told them not to worry about it. And we waited another few weeks before they decided to actually try to move it.
You mentioned. Go ahead.
Criminals who cooperate are the best ones around.
Yes, they are.
She doesn't realize she was acting as an agent of the U.S. Customs Service at that moment. She was assisting. So when you talk about, you mentioned billions of dollars. Now, I've worked on Asian heroin cases, and I happen to remember from my day that it's exponentially more valuable than cocaine. So if you have a pound of cocaine and a pound of heroin, what you can make off each, it dwarfs cocaine's profits. And cocaine dwarfed marijuana when it first came out. So, 1,000 pounds, as you said, is an unbelievable amount of money on the street.
Especially it was like 98% pure. It was crazy.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. That's the stuff you're getting probably from Chiang Rai and the mountains of Thailand. It's the best stuff in the world, the most desirable heroin in the world. It's not Mexican black tar. This is the stuff that blows it away. And that stuff made a trip from Southeast Asia all the way to Port of San Francisco under heavy security and guaranteed that heads rolled after that, right? I mean, there's no way they let that go without internal discipline. Somebody messed up.
Well, they couldn't find that. They couldn't, after they decided they were going to actually now separate the heroin from the plastic bag boxes, they couldn't find it. And this just shows you how big the amount is. So they decided that they're going to call up and get the people that packaged it to actually come on over to show them the system, because obviously they couldn't figure out the box system. They didn't want to have to open up all the boxes. So luckily we got the two dumbasses that came over that packaged it and arrested them too when they finally came and couldn't find it. So we knew that at that point the gig was going to be up, right? So
you know what? We've said it our entire careers that there's stuff you just can't make up. You just can't. Because no one would believe it if you just blanketly told that story. We believe it because it's happened to us too.
Yeah, well, and this is their fourth shipment. I mean, quite frankly, if you smuggle in a couple $1 billion worth of heroin, I mean, the logical person, you win the lottery, you leave, because you're probably not going to win the lottery again. They should have just packed up and went home. I mean, there was a family. They owned a little motel in outside of Oakland, California. There's no reason for them to continue on except what gets every criminal that we deal with: greed.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Absolutely.
They see that money and it's like, I can make more and I'm going to make more. And they get enthralled by it. It's the same reason why undercovers often would flash the money. I've seen, $250,000 flashes, undercovers. This is what I got. Take a look at it, put it in the trunk, go get your stuff, get out of here. Once they see the money, you could walk right next to them in uniform and they wouldn't even notice you. All they know is the money, laser like on the money. Um, it does. It makes you do stupid,
You
stupid
know,
things.
it's also Dan and Tom, interesting to spend time in San Francisco and go to jury trials. So I'll tell you an interesting one, and this can happen anywhere nowadays, but it was very unique back then. So we were hired by a gentleman. Actually, this crazy older man comes in and says, "Hey, my nephew or my stepson is wants me to go to boat school and get my boat license, and then I'm supposed to drop out of boat school because they don't want anybody to know that I got my license, and they're going to build me a boat, and I'm going to captain it to go pick up some cocaine off the coast of Mexico." And he went to a couple of agencies, and they're like, "Get out of here, old man." He shows up in like a trench coat and a hat on top of his head, like he's like Columbo or something, right, in disguise.
Yeah.
And so he comes to our office like, "Hey, we got time. We'll entertain him, right?" Yeah, I never turned anybody away. And so we sign him up as an informant, and lo and behold, he's going to classes, and he's an older gentleman. So luckily, we were able to have his stepson to introduce an undercover in there to him to say, "Hey, look, I'm never going to be able to, at my age, be able to do this. I'll introduce you to somebody I met in my boat school who will actually be willing to do this for you, and probably do a lot better job than I did." So we got an undercover in almost over a year. Where I'm picking up and laundering all kinds of money for the Colombian cartels, 150,000 here, 700,000 there. We're laundering millions of dollars and seizing all kinds of stuff from the Colombian cartels all over the United States. And this old man and his nephew are getting $25,000 at a time to buy boats and engines and assemble them. And it took over about a year. And I'm like thinking, meanwhile, these organizations are sending you $25,000. I'm picking up and laundering, $1 million this month for them. We could have I wish they would have just, made the relationship. We could have got this boat built a lot faster. So we had several hundred undercover meetings between the stepson who hired us and the undercover and the crew that was going to go out and do this, to the point that in one of the meetings, the subject pulled out a gun and put it up against the forehead of the undercover and told him that if anything went bad in this deal, that he was going to kill him first because he would be killed for sure. So just gave him a warning. It's all recorded. We go to trial, play all these videos. I'm sitting there hitting play. In the old days, audio in the courtroom was I put the microphone down on a little cassette recorder and hit play, right?
Right. Yeah.
There was no sound system in there. So every day we're playing those things, you rewind, replaying it again. And we got a hung jury. We got a hung jury for the guy. We by the way, we delivered it. We delivered it to the warehouse that he told us to deliver at, and we arrested him. And we got a hung jury. Now, luckily, the next go round he was convicted and sentenced, but it just shows you that was the beginning of something that was really disappointing, and that was distrust in government. And with Rodney King and the stuff that happened in LA, they just had this distrust in the government. Some of the jurors did, and they felt sorry for him because he had a really good defense attorney that didn't argue the facts, but argue how he was a victim and how his stepfather took advantage of him and set him up.
Juries never cease to amaze me.
Yep. Anything can happen. You put 12 people in a box, you read them a set of facts, you put the show on in front of them, and to get them all to agree is a minor miracle. It just is. It's a human system, and it's flawed because it's human. So lots of drugs, lots of crazy stuff. Where did you go on to from there? There came a time when you left that and went on to a new agency.
The two things, and I was there when we started seeing the onset of Colombia just becoming a producer and distributor and letting Mexico and Mexican cartels get rid of the risk. Because quite frankly, there's only so many Colombian shipments. It's easy to pick out. So they just started supplying the Mexicans, and the Mexicans were smuggling all the cocaine in. And as you mentioned, Dan, they also saw the value of what it was for heroin. For 1 key of heroin could get you as much as a whole shipment of cocaine. So easier to conceal, easier to smuggle. So you saw that natural shift that came across. And there was still marijuana and seizures, stuff like that. And at that time, you'd have to seize literally over a ton of marijuana to get a federal prosecution in California. But we did have those. We had 80 tons of hash that we did an undercover offload of. But during that time, I grew up in Michigan. I was just hoping to get back to Michigan. After about 8 years, I got back to Michigan, thinking I was going to leave like Mexican cartels and Colombian cartels behind, and I found out, they're in Michigan too.
Yeah.
So I kept doing undercover money laundering operations, and then when 9/11 hit, I mean, that changed everything. And I work at a company today that many of our employees, were just kids then, and some maybe not even born, or were toddlers and don't even have that emotional connection to that day, like all of us did, specifically in and out of law enforcement. But I was in Detroit, 9/11 hit. I remember watching the special agent in charge. At that time, I had become a group supervisor, running a drug group, and the special agent in charge had a TV on in his room, and we watched the news of the first plane hit and couldn't really figure out what had happened. Was it an accident? What was going on here? Was it pilot error or individual? Didn't necessarily instantly think this is an attack of terrorism, right? And then next thing you know, when that second plane hit, then all bets were off. But it was interesting in Detroit. There's people work on both sides of the border all day long in Windsor, Canada, driving back and forth all day long. One of the largest land border crossings, passenger crossings every day. And literally people just were trying to turn around on the bridge and go home. And at that time, you could come in, and why we focus so much in undercover operations in customs is because the border was tactically not in control of. So if you drove over in with a load of dope or missile system in the back of your car, where the license plate was seldomly ran. Usually you would run the driver, because this was all done manually, and you have to wait a few minutes and see what happens. You got 12,000 people crossing every day. And so let's say that we knew that this car was going to come over, or Jim was going to come over with a load of dope or something more nefarious. And if Jim rented a car and was using a rental car, probably not going to get there. So we would have an undercover operation. And I mean, that's all drastically changed since 9/11. Drastically changed. I was there when we were installing radiation detection equipment that was so sensitive to pick up any type of, and that's like all you had to do is cross. If you had a medical, a medical treatment that used a nuclear type of testing material in it, you would be picked up. So I was there. So it drastically changed, and that's when we pivoted from, hey, let's look at instead of drug money laundering, let's set up, and we set up one of the first Department of Treasury undercover money laundering operation focusing terrorist financing. And back then it was a lot done by haalas, which is not completely too different than the black market peso exchange that the Colombians would use, right? And so we started a money laundering operation there, and we had a really good success of looking at money going. Some maybe was it going for terrorism? You never know, but it was definitely going to the regions of the world in a very undisclosed, undocumented ways and methods, and we're talking tens of millions of dollars at a time. So that was really when we pivoted to. Before, if I knew there was a hole in the border, and I would sit there all day long and catch the people coming through, right? After 9/11, you had to patch the holes up. You had to find every vulnerability because the stakes were so much higher at that time.
So for the audience who doesn't know what a haala is a system of ledgers here and there, wherever that there may be. It can be the Middle East, someplace, some country. And it's kept, records are kept. Rather than send the money overseas, it's internally distributed locally to even up, so to speak. And I'm really, really simplifying it, but it does not require transcontinental movement of money. It averts the radar, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, I'll give you a really simple example of what we found at one of the convenience stores. In Michigan, we call them party stores. It's a convenience store, a liquor store, right? They sell everything in there. Back then, international calling cards were a big deal. So you could go into a convenience store in Michigan, and that guy's selling international calling cards. So you could give that person $100,000, get all the international calling cards. Then you don't have to even send the cards over. You then send all the codes in an email to, say, Pakistan. Now, you have the money in the United States from the sale of that $100,000. The guy in Pakistan then goes and sells those cards for probably about $120,000. So he has his money, you have your money, and then you wait for when he needs somebody. He's got a customer that needs paid out because he's got a family member or something like that. Something it's often used legitimately, right? Say somebody in Pakistan needs to send their grandma some money in Detroit, they would do that and back and forth. And the value, as you mentioned, the dollars never have to change. It's just a ledger book of debts and debits and credits.
It's fascinating, and a lot of cultures do that still. I mean, I saw in the Asian community they have their own internal banking system. Um, keeps them off the radar in certain ways.
Yeah, and that was, you know what,
Fascinating.
we've all been involved in terrorism investigations, and that was one thing about especially Al Qaeda. They got educated. They would find out what worked in whatever criminal element was doing something, and they would research it and see how it worked. Like you just, you hit it on the head, Jim, when you said it was very similar to the drug trade because that's what they mirror. And they're, from talking to bad guys around the world, like we've all done, Al Qaeda was very big on if it works, keep using it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And that was great for you to say that it's very similar because criminals are criminals, and criminals will do what works. And that was a great point of just how terrorism and wants to blow the world up are the same mindset when they're especially moving money that just drug dealers are.
The ideology is the only thing that changes, right? That's the methods and means are often so similar and perfected, right? Because they're planners, they're planning and plotting, especially back in the old days. Yeah, very
Patient.
patient. Yeah.
So after 9/11, George Bush creates
Yeah.
Department of Homeland Security. A variety of federal agencies, including yours, are pulled in under that umbrella. Tell us about how that changed your role and your work there.
Yeah. So when as a customs special agent, I was on the border. So when they said Homeland Security, I'm like, well, we are Homeland Security, right? Matter of fact, U.S. Customs patches that I didn't wear a uniform, right, as an investigator, but the inspectors at the borders patches said Protectors of Independence, right? I mean that was the Homeland. You're the border security. So I was like, this is an easy fix. I figured that what happened is they abolished the immigration system, and one thing I learned really quickly after, having immigration authorities is you're guaranteed to make 50% of the people unhappy 100% of the time because either somebody wants you to do more and another group wants you to do less every single time. But so DHS was created, and the powers that be thought it was a good idea to take these special agents outside of customs because they were going to merge Border Patrol and some of the other phases of the inspection process, the clearance process at the border, into the U.S. Customs Service, which today is Customs and Border Protection. So when they did that, they created one of the largest law enforcement organizations on the planet, 60-some thousand people. They did not want them to have the investigative capabilities too, because they thought they would be a little bit unwieldy and unworldly. This is the basement conversations by junior people that make our government run in the bottoms of buildings, right? These aren't political appointed people until much later on, until the recommendations come. I can tell you that Tom Ridge didn't believe in it. He was the first secretary of DHS. He saw the value, as you all know, Dan, in the NYPD, the last thing you want is a deviation between and two bosses running the patrol division, for example, and the detective division. They ultimately got to respond to the same. But they came up with this great idea, and so they created ICE, and which was the name was not what Tom Ridge wanted. Tom Ridge wanted investigations and criminal enforcement. Some of my agencies at the time, because they were established, said no, they didn't like that name because it could, compete with them. And so we got ICE. And I tell you, the probably one of the, like the misinformed type of names. So I always tell people my first part of my career, it cost them 16 years. I explained to my family and everybody else that I didn't work at the border. I actually investigated the border crime, right? I didn't wear a blue uniform. I wore, plain clothes. Then this happens. And then now it's ICE and everybody, the Border Patrol is hiring a ton of people. And so then everybody thinks, oh, you work at DHS, you wear a green uniform. So I was like, no, I don't wear a green uniform. Matter of fact, my nephew told me one day, he says, Uncle Jim, he's like, it's too hard to explain to people what you do. So I just tell them you work for the FBI. It's like, wonderful. A lot of good friends at the FBI, really good friends. A lot of people I started with. And I'm like, now I get credit for everything that I didn't even do in my own family, right? But yeah, so that changed a lot. So we became in the Office of Investigations at ICE. And so I because I was doing counterterrorism, undercover operations, and finance, I got my ticket punched to come to headquarters in DC and run the financial investigations program, and working with banks to say, these are all the cases. We're doing thousands of money laundering cases. This is how we're seeing that these criminals are going to exploit your financial institutions, and identifying these programs to identify not just drug money laundering, because like Tom, as you mentioned, right, it's criminals are going to launder their money the same way. So how do you just protect our financial institutions and our trade, travel, and finance systems from being exploited by transnational criminal organizations, some of those being terrorism. So I spent that time doing that and thinking I'd go back to Detroit. And, I was left as assistant special agent in charge. I just wanted to be back home. That's where my wife of today, 34 years, we're from the same hometown. We're the only folks that left. And I thought we'd just get back, and nobody wants to go to Detroit, usually speaking. And, but as I planned to go back, and she almost didn't come with me because I was so assured I'd be back and we'd just do a commute for a while. God was laughing. And I over 20 years, I haven't got back to Detroit yet.
Hey, like Mike Tyson always said, God. It's always great to have a plan until you get hit with a right hook.
Exactly. Yeah. So I did have, I was fortunate enough to I was called and I think anybody that served during the 9/11 or Colombian cartels and seeing people being slaughtered on the street with their necks sliced and stuff, throat sliced. So I think, I knew and I felt really obligated. I was doing something that I loved. I love being a special agent. It was a calling that I just fell into, and I really enjoyed it. And, as you go up, you think, well, I'm an agent's agent. I can help out the 15 people that work for me as a group supervisor, or the 60 or 70 people that work as an assistant special agent in charge. And how can you empower them to do more and get more out of it? And then in headquarters, I came in as having been in the field, but a lot of the people in headquarters had not been in the field as leadership in ICE. They had been, I'd served there. I came in 2004. And so we had been ICE for about a year. And somebody had, got a call to the director's office after a couple of years in headquarters, think I'm going to get in trouble, and which always happened on a Friday, and it was a Friday, and she asked me to go and act as the special agent in charge in Baltimore, which I lived in Virginia. That would be about a 150-mile a day commute back and forth. And she's like, oh, but you get a government car. And I'm like, ma'am, I will drive to Miami every day if it gets me out of headquarters for a while. And that was the last day that I went back in that office. So I was in Baltimore thinking I'm just going to go back to headquarters. And I get a call one day and said, hey, Jim, act surprised because you're going to be named as the special agent in charge of Baltimore. I was like, well, one is I would have been surprised because I didn't put in for the role. And I wouldn't have put in for the role because I'm not going to move my family to Baltimore from 55 miles away when I'm not going to stay here long term. And so I became the special agent in charge in Baltimore, and then I ran OPR for a while in headquarters as an interim. Then I finally got the job that I thought I was going to ride off into retirement with, which was the special agent in charge of Washington, D.C., which actually was based in Virginia. So it covered Virginia and Washington, D.C. I was like, now I can live and work in the same house, in the same state, and I can see my family, and this is going to be great. And then God was laughing along the way too after a couple
You got that right hook again.
Oh my
But
God.
it turned out to be the biggest blessing, as much as the biggest. I mean, it took a lot out of me, but I get a call to the new director of ICE, and he wanted me to come up there, and him and the deputy are like, "Hey, we want you to be the head of Office of Investigations." Marcy Foreman, great lady, who'd been there for a long time, and they were she was going to be retiring shortly thereafter, and like, we want you to step in and take over. And I mean, there's a guy that started as a co-op, just a few miles away. That was a hell of an offer, and I told him no. I said, look, I've been especially in charge in 2 offices. I came in and ran OPR. I was in did my headquarters tour, and I'm finally back living and working in the same state, and actually get to see my kids, before they go to bed. And it's time for somebody else to step up. And John Morton says, hey, look, I'm not going to make you do it. It's crazy that people aren't fighting for this role, but I'm not going to make you do it. And but I respect that. And then about 6 months later, I get a call and says, stop by and see the director. And I thought that, cool, he's going to ask me my opinion of something. And, that is the curse of being especially in charge of the location where your headquarters is at, so they can call you in. And so I ran in and said, I tell you, Morton was just really frustrated that he was about to announce somebody that they didn't pass the vetting of it. And he's like, just said, Jim, you're going to be the head of investigations, if you like it or not. And he learned that we have this ability, which was a great ability, which I miss to this day, especially in the private sector, which is called a redirected assignment. And you can get a redirected assignment, and that says you have 3 options. You accept it. If you're eligible to retire, you can retire, or you can resign. So we called it relocate. It's 3R: relocate, resign, or retire, and that's your options. And he was so frustrated. He's like, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I'm a political appointee. Anything could happen. And you're the guy. Everybody says you're guy. You're it. And that was when I told him, look, obviously I don't have a chance to do it, but I will accept to do it on one condition. Is when you're tired of me, because I'm going to do this role and I'm going to do the best I can. And I'm going to try to do the best I can for the 10,000 people of, well, at that time it was 8,000 people of Office of Investigations. But I'm not going to do it to just make you happy. And if you are unhappy with me, that's great. Just let me leave. I'll go back to Detroit. I'll go any place. I don't want to be shipped off to some basement in some headquarters building. He shook my hand. He said, deal. And about 4 months after that, this was in December of 2000, well, actually November 2009. So I start my briefings in November and December about how the agency that was completely unfunded and underfunded because of the merger, and DHS was created by sucking the blood out of all the agencies, right? And then creating another layer on top. And now look, I say that, it sounds bad, but that's the reality. It wasn't like they invested and created a new department with new funding. It came from the organizations within it to fund it. And so it was already unfunded. And then I get the briefing that we're going to have a $60 million shortfall for the next year, the year I come in. So I get to be the guy that's not only has the bad budget, but now I got to even cut it even more and figure out how to deal with it. One thing changed. A man on a plane wearing a bomb in his underwear flew into Detroit. Christmas Day underwear bomber. And that changed everything. I show up on January as the new head of Office of Investigations, and congressional staff members are calling me saying, what would you do with another $80 million? Forget the $60 million shortfall. And I said that we would do everything we can to combat terrorism. And we got that $80 million. And so it was a $100+ million swing by that one day. And it just showed that the threat didn't go away. We still face it today. The men and women in law enforcement today, they face the greatest threats that we ever had as a nation. You have child exploitation, you have, retail crime, organized retail crime. You have terrorism dispersed amongst all of our communities. You have ideology and radicalization of things. And then you have the World Wide Web, that is and fentanyl, which it creates a doorway of opportunity into every home and every kid's device. It's just mind-boggling what people have to face in law enforcement today, and sometimes without any respect and appreciation.
Crazy stuff. You bring up some very good points. A lot of the stuff that you guys looked at during your career is the kind of stuff that the average person walking down the street would never know about, right? They wouldn't notice it. It goes on in its own little world, and cops know about it because you have to. You stick your nose into it. But now we live in a world where you can't even walk into a shopping mall without, I mean, look at Philadelphia the last couple of nights. It's gotten crazy. This isn't. It's kind of like an open door to take a peek at what's really going on in the heart and soul of America. In many ways, is this lawlessness stuff, um, and it has to turn around. It simply has to. It's unacceptable. How can you be standing in a store and a flash mob comes in and they just start breaking things and stealing expensive items? It's happening as we speak.
Everywhere.
Dan,
Yeah.
when we are as and that's the one thing I liked about law is it's rules based, right? You don't want to see Jim Dinkins,
Yeah.
don't break the rule, right? And
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
and we live in a rules based society that people respect the rules, and if they break the rules, you're punished. If you take away the rules, and sometimes it's the base level humanity rules of like respecting retailer and theft. You take that away, what's the next line? If you tell your kid when they're 18 years old to be home at 11, they're probably going to be home at 11:30. And then if you tell them 11:30, you give that, then it's going to be 12. Where is the line that we're going to draw of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable when we're a rules-based society? We can't make excuses for everybody because everybody's got an excuse. We all have. Life is hard on all of us. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Life is hard. It's going to, you're going to lose family members. You're going to have divorces. You're going to have get laid off of your job. Life is hard. So where is the rules that when are we going to stop making an exception because of little Jimmy is had a hard life? My dad committed suicide. My mom and dad were divorced. I grew up. My mom raised us on her own. There's all kinds of reasons to be a victim. We all face, that's biblical. So we got to stop making excuses for people and get back to just respecting basic rules of society.
Yep.
I heard
And you know what?
Go ahead.
The problem with that, with what's going on today, that law enforcement has to deal with, that politicians and the public doesn't realize, is that these little things that are happening and breaking the laws and not having accountability for laws perpetuate larger crimes. I've said it for years, Dan. You've heard me say it on the show a million times. Politicians think criminals are idiots, and they're not. They're very intelligent. Everyone's got a cell phone, everyone's on the internet all day long. And even worse, in our world, the terrorists. They are the most patient people on earth. They have no timeline, they have no sense of time. So all they wait for is for this country to lower what's going on, and they infiltrate. They do it all the time. They just wait. So, and they watch the news and they're on the internet. So they see everything that's going on. Now, chaos is going to bring worse and more chaos. And that's what is dangerous in this country today, is that these listen, you have bad criminals and we've all dealt with them. You have worse criminals in this world who want to literally blow the world up. And they are just sitting and watching what's going on. And until politicians and the people who are voting these people in change what's going on, we're in for a really, really bad time.
You're seeing it already. You're seeing it already in big cities around America. You're seeing the decay. It's gotten to the point where there are cities now that I just don't have any interest or desire in ever going to for a
No.
long time again. And not to name them off, I think we all know. Not going there. What's the point? Why would I? And it's scary.
Yeah.
It's
I am
terrible.
optimistic though. What I think we're a big bleeding heart country. Look at how much money we give around the world for humanitarian reasons and stuff, right? And I think that sometimes that we forget. I think every politician should have to walk the halls of the 9/11 memorial in New York. I was just out there last week. I think you should have to go through that experience. You should have to listen to those phone calls, and you have to live it and experience what the stakes are of your decisions. And then I have a feeling, though, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we're going to see this pendulum that say, you know what, we are open-hearted and very caring and giving, but it doesn't come without, consequences if you take advantage of it, and it doesn't come without some some price tags to that. And I think as people start seeing the decay, and there are a lot of do-gooders want to do good, we all do, but then they start seeing the decay, and then it starts impacting the very people that are funding the decay are being impacted because they can't open their businesses on time. They're being robbed, and so now it's like, why am I the victim? I'm the one that's funding the taxes to actually support the people that we're trying to do good for. So I'm hoping that we'll see this pendulum swing back a little bit and realize that it was kind of a bad experience to do the allow the breaking rules for a reason mentality.
I agree.
So I heard a great quote today on the radio, and I won't attribute the quote because it may not be exactly right, but it's along these lines. Hardship is not a choice. Victimhood is. So it doesn't matter where you come from, it's how you view your opportunities to rise yourself up. And this country's always been a place where people who come from hard scrabble or school of hard knocks have been able, if they have the right mindset. If you stop thinking of yourself as a victim and you start thinking of yourself as somebody who has an opportunity and you're willing to work to pursue that and have goals, you can do anything you want in this country. It's been proven countless times. But we are in a society where we, like you said, the word excuses. Well, didn't have it easy as a kid, so we're going to let them get away with hand-to-hand drug sales in the corner, and we're not going to prosecute them. And as a result, the neighborhoods fall apart. But anyway, this is a great discussion. But back really quick to you, Jim. You have you were an integral part in the investigation of how many investigations have there been of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who is the king of all kings of the Mexican cartels, and a man who would probably make most other people through history blush with the sheer volume of homicides that he ordered or conducted himself. Tell us about how you got involved in that case and what you learned from it.
So after I told you guys about how I was like forced into a role to become the director of Office of Investigations, it came in that January, and then 4 or 5 months later, about in May, I had the opportunity to reorganize, work with the director of ICE, and we reorganized what the agency was going to look like. We created Homeland Security Investigations. We took the domestic investigations, which I was under, Office of Investigations. We took the international. There was 60 some offices. Now they have 78 or so, 80 offices internationally, because everything that they investigate has a overseas nexus to it. And then the Office of Intelligence. We created Homeland Security Investigations. And during that time, El Chapo was, notorious. He had escaped. He was like a ghost. And I used to get classified briefings every morning, what's going on in the world, all the bad people that want to hurt us. And they might have a sighting of this, of Chapo is over here, but nobody could really pin him down. And when they did try to pin him down, he always escaped. And because, they have the best counterintelligence operations in the world, the entire community that they're funding and either through bribery and or intimidation. So I remember we got a call from our specially in charge, Matt Allen, down in Arizona, and he said, "Hey Jim," he says, "we need to come up and brief you on this case that we have." I was like, "Great," and it was in 2013, and he's like, so I was like, "Let's do it." So he came up at the end of the year, and he briefed how they had been working along with DEA, and it was a great case because DEA had pieces and HSI had pieces, and they were working together so that they were able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And when one dropped off because they changed cell phones, the other one picked up on it, and they were really just working hand in hand at the organization. And he showed me quotes on a board of where they thought that they had actually, which had not generally happened, were actually on El Chapo's phone himself. Now, this guy's illiterate, so he didn't do a lot of his own texting. He would have people text for him, but he was a new grandfather, And so you could tell that the communications was from him. And the cool thing is all the people around him that they were collecting on the phone were people that could be arrested and indicted, but they weren't looking. What they wanted to do is they wanted to get El Chapo. So they mapped out the command and control structure that he had, and the people he surrounded himself would be on for, like, say, 7 to 14 days. Then they would rotate off. But when they rotated off, the phone was the position that they were responsible for: transportation, logistics. So the phone stayed there. You're like the desk officer for that responsibility. And so they mapped out, they planned out, and they were doing it, looking at a pattern of life to try to go after them. But the Mexican military who launched such an operation had no confidence that they tried it over the years. Every time they either bloodshed in an inner city, or if it was in the woods in some remote area, there would be, he would escape and they would take casualties. So they were very not so optimistic in it and willingly to, let's say, jump right in and believe in this. But, by three months later, in early part of 2014, they really developed a pattern of life, and they thought that he had was going to go and get his family together and his people together at a hunting lodge that was right off the coast. And that provided a logistical opportunity for the SAMAR, the Mexican Marines, their equivalent to like the Navy SEALs, would be able to stage off the coast and basically land from there, because it's not like in Detroit or New York or DC. They know you're coming. If you have an unknown one vehicle, let alone a convoy of vehicles, of armored vehicles rolling up into a neighborhood, they know you're coming. So they had to plan a surprise and attack. And they did that under the ruse of a training exercise, the Marines training in the water off the coast, that gave them the reason to be there. And as we talked about so much, as we planned, God was laughing, and the hunting trip was canceled. But they had trained for days and weeks. And so even though that wasn't going to be optimal, they had eyes on him at a house, safe house off the coast. And so they made the call, because they could no longer spend the time with Mexico City burning, right, with homicides all over. They could no longer spend the time waiting for the opportunity. So they said, we're going to go in, we're going to be able to do it. We'll get them or we won't, but we gotta show up and start doing our civil protection duties and public safety duties thereafter. And so they launched the operation. It was fantastic. It was amazing, because DEA and HSI worked together. They worked side by side. We had complete trust and transparency. We had the same objection: catch El Chapo. We briefed a vetted unit, and a vetted unit of foreign nationals is when the U.S. government polygraphs the law enforcement agencies of another country to ensure that they weren't on the take, because operational security went out the window, generally speaking, within 5 minutes within many departments. So we have DEA, FBI, HSI have vetted units. And there was a military vetted unit that was there, and that was the SAMAR vetted unit. And they did not tell a single soul. They kept it under the radar from the politicians, from the senior leadership. And they could no longer stall of why they were out doing this exercise for weeks. And they made that arrest. I retired, and the only reason why anybody who can Google me and find my name on there is because I retired a month later. And the news and everybody was thirsty for what was happening. The government in an extradition case is never going to say a word. And so they all called and said, make Dinkins do it. He'll do it. He's retired. They can't tell him not to talk. So that's what landed me on. That's what landed me on doing all the basically the PR for DEA and HSI and the U.S. government and the efforts that was done, is because I was the recent retired guy that had firsthand knowledge enough to talk about it, and was able to go on and talk about the great work that was done. And you know what was amazing? That first arrest, not a single Mexican federale or military officer was killed. It went off like it wasn't flawless, because they took a long time to try to get through this stash horse door. They literally took him several minutes to get there. So he had escaped down a tunnel, but nobody ended up getting shot or hurt, and he was able to be arrested.
The importance of tactical planning, going after somebody like El Chapo, it's on steroids compared to what the average law enforcement officer deals with all the time, and we take it's life and death, take it very seriously. But that's a guy who him and his sicarios and his bodyguards would shoot it out with the most sophisticated weaponry, military grade weaponry, and they would go to the death. So you're not going against, a guy who steals cars. This is bad people going against an army.
Yeah, they have 50
And
calibers,
you got
they have
half of the
grenades,
country.
50 calibers, submachine guns, machine guns. They have the
Yeah,
whole arsenal.
yeah. And not afraid to use them as is indicated by the body counts. I mean, Mexico is a country that needs a lot of help with regards to that. The cartels have done a lot of tremendous damage, and there's a lot of good people in Mexico, and I pray for them because the cartels, they need to be eradicated. They really do. But and you did a lot of work towards that, Jim.
Awesome.
Um,
Amazing.
so we could probably stay on this call for 6 hours, and we're going to see you soon in person. I can't
Yeah.
wait for that. It's been a couple of years since I've seen you, Jim, and looking forward to it. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing just a little snippet of your story. Fascinating cases, and you're a hero of mine. I've always looked up to you, and thank you for what you did for our country. Um, and we know that a lot of things that you helped start with Homeland Security Investigations have pulled together agencies that used to be disparate. They're all over the place. Now they're talking. Now they're working together, and that's an accomplishment. So thank you for your
Well, thank
part
you
in that
both
too.
for your service as well, and I appreciate being on and having the time to share some old war stories.
You know what?
Absolutely.
We Dan, we say it all the time. You sound like a broken record. We have these people, detectives, agents, who are so dedicated to what they do and love what they do. And I tell people all the time who ask me about going into law enforcement and going into the federal system, and I say the same thing all the time. You can't like it. You have to love it. You can't like it. If you like it, you're going to fail and you're not going to succeed. You have to love what you do because it becomes part of you. It becomes part of your life. It becomes part of your family's life. So you better love it. uh, but you just showed that, you said it over and over again. And this is why I bring this up, the dedication part and what it means to love your job. You said probably 4 times on this interview how important it was for you to get home and be in Michigan. But if the mission called for it, you were there. As much as you wanted to be somewhere, if the mission called for it, you were there. And that's something that's in your DNA. It's something that's in you. That's not taught. I don't care how much training, blah, 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 you go through. That dedication is not taught. It's in you. It's instilled in your blood. And, like Dan said, thank you for everything you did in your career. You're a humble guy, I can tell. And, us saying thank you, you kind of put your head down a little bit, but thank you for what you did for this country.
I appreciate it. And yeah, there was no work-life balance. I never knew that term because my work was my life. And, I'll end it on this as we all enjoyed it. And I tell you, I mean, it wasn't all good days by no means, right? But I wouldn't have traded it for anything. And the people that really are the ones that kind of have to deal with the challenges of it is the families and the wives and the kids and, your parents and not knowing what's going to happen with you and when you leave. And, you might get called out and miss a holiday party or Christmas Eve, but you're going to do what you signed up to do. They didn't sign up to have you do that, right? And so I always have to thank all the spouses and the families that tolerated us and supported us, because they made the real sacrifice, right? We were doing what we loved, and they were having to deal with the consequences of it.
Absolutely.
And that's a recurring theme on the show. We get people like yourself on, and there's very few like yourself, but we get people like yourself on who comment on that, and they always tip the hat, and we do too, to the families because they go through this too. Jim, thank you so much. Maybe one day we'll have you on again, but for right now, we're going to say thank you, and Tom will take us out, and we're looking forward to seeing you in person in a couple of weeks, Jim.
Can't wait. Can't wait to meet him. Like we do all the time. It's a thankless job. Everyone does it not to get rich. They do it because they love what they do. So everyone out there, please say a prayer, give a thought to law enforcement people around the country, local, state, federal, all of them, because they do a job 90% of this country would never volunteer to do. All right. And a lot of them, all of us included, for a time that we did it because we love it. And if you think about it, we do it for a bunch of strangers that we don't know and we're going out to protect. So give them a fist bump in the store, wave to them on the street, say thank you. That means the world to them. And the military as well. You know, when they're in the store, give them a slap on the back. Honestly, that means the world to them. And once again, we got to do our plugs of youtube.com/@goldshields. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, and be part of this great ride we're on. Rumble.com/goldshields as well as all our audio podcast platforms. We're out there, and thank you for everyone who's doing that on a daily basis. Dan and I really appreciate it a lot. And for Jim Dinkins, my partner, Dan Murphy, in his undisclosed secret location that no one's allowed to know about. This is Tom Smith for Gold Shields again, and stay safe, everyone. We'll see you soon.